So most community managers treat an interview like an interrogation. And I understand why. Like it feels like one, we sit there, we cross our hands together, and the moment we're asked a question which we didn't feel totally prepared for, just completely not what we were expecting, we freeze up and we struggle to answer. But the best candidates don't do that. The best candidates understand that it is a conversation and you're able to lead that conversation to an extent. More specifically, treating the call more like a discovery call so that we can understand what they want and use their words against them in the best possible way and make them feel like you're the exact person that they want to hire. So let me give you a perfect example of what I mean by this. So Jennifer, who's part of my program, we're in a second tier interview. And she came on the interview fully prepared. Jennifer always fully prepares. And what threw her completely off guard was the person interviewing her was head of sales. Nothing to do with community, head of sales. And he started off firing very sales heavy questions, which completely threw her off guard. She was so prepared and it just completely just threw her off. For example, one of the questions he asked is it was like a coaching program. They're looking for a community manager for the program. Something that he asked was like, how would you make it more likely for the members to renew their membership, which of course is a very salesy question. So because the questions were not what she expected, she was completely thrown off guard, and by the end of it felt like the answers that she gave him weren't totally on the mark and didn't really resonate with him, what he wanted to hear. The interview felt very rigid and it just felt flat. Now this happens all the time. It happens very much so when you're talking to someone who's in their own department and you don't know what they actually want, you don't know what they actually care about, and therefore you're not actually connecting with them. It can happen in different capacities too. It could just happen genuinely you're talking to a community manager and they are a community manager or someone who understands community but you're just not connecting with them. It can happen in so many different ways and it happens so often. It's very common. If you just sit there and guess, then you lose. So what could have Jennifer done differently in this situation? She needed to use discovery to her advantage. Instead of just accepting that confusing question and just stumbling through giving an answer, you're allowed to ask questions back. Like you are allowed to say something like, hey, like I'm not entirely sure what the context is. Would you mind giving me that before I answer this question, or answering a more direct question? That you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to ask and discover what they want, what they need, what they want to hear from you. You're allowed to use the conversation, to use the interview more like a conversation to really learn what they care about, to really enable yourself the chance to actually connect with them so they don't disregard you as a candidate. Quite often, the person you're talking to may not even care about community. They may care about their department, but how community is going to connect with what they care about. Or maybe if they may be in the department of community, but what do they care about? I need to figure that out. So here is exactly how you do this, how you flip the usual structure rigid interview into something that will help you give the best answers and connect with whoever is interviewing you. So first, you can always maximize the introduction. Now, obviously read the room. If they're very rigid and they just want to move on, we can't force them to stick on certain questions and sometimes it doesn't feel right. Always read the room, but you can use the introduction, the before the questions, to really lean in and ask them a few questions that feel natural. For example, if they haven't introduced themselves properly, ask them who they are, what do they do, what are the pain points in their department, what are the pain points in their role, what do they care about, how do they currently work with community, how could they see community supporting them and what they do, where do they think the gaps are. All of those questions, get them talking about their problems, and you will have so much more to connect with them, especially in later questions that they ask you. Doing that earlier is obviously very beneficial because if we do that, usually they say, do you have any questions at the end? If we do that early on as possible, then we can again answer the questions better, answer the questions based on what they actually and connect with them. If we do it at the end, we've already lost the opportunity to do that. Like it's already been and gone. So now what do you do when they actually ask you a question? Remember that when they ask you a question, you're not sure how to answer, or you're not 100% sure what they're looking for, because sometimes we can interpret the question wrong, or we're not entirely sure how to interpret it. You don't have to answer straight away. You're allowed to say and ask a question back, like, hey, would you mind clarifying a bit more for me what you mean by that? Or even go deeper and say, like, I feel like I don't have all the context to answer that to the best of my ability based on like who you are, what you do, what the business is. Would you mind if I ask the question before that so I can fully answer that question later? Like you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to ask permission to ask another question back if that feels more comfortable, if that feels more kind of like you're being respectful of their time, right? You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to pause. You don't have to answer a question straight away. There's no no one that should be marking you based on that. So once you ask that question, let them talk first. If they say something like, say they're the head of sales, again, as the example, oh, we're struggling to retain customers after a 6-month period, then you have such useful information. Now, when they ask that question back or ask questions in the future during that interview, you can remember that, like, they are struggling to retain their customers after 6 months. So how can you, as a community manager, how have you in the past been able to retain those customers, been able to hold retention for a long time? That's clearly something that they really care about, and something that if you show that you can do or you've done, then you are connecting with what they actually want to hear. So obviously, if you've forgotten the original question, like go back to it and say, okay, thank you so much. That gives me a lot more context. Would you mind giving me the original question so I can answer it to the best of my ability and answer it based on, you know, what that context was, what you've learned from them? And you will be a lot less panicked because you have more context, you have more time to think about it, and you've taken the time to actually understand them. And they should be able to see that and feel more connected with you because you genuinely actually, you know, care about their business, want to understand it, and want to give the best answer possible as a community manager, what you could potentially be achieving in that company, in that business, in that role. So of course, always keep in mind the tone. Like some interviews are very rigid. I am seeing that usually kind of first interviews, kind of screening interviews are very rigid. Like you may have questions at the end, and screening interviews are very, very different to those interviews which are more like a conversation with the team where you kind of gone past that first stage and you're meeting like team members at this point, or you're meeting someone very important, the CEO, whoever that is. They're usually less rigid. They're usually more conversational. And that's where people kind of fall apart because they're expecting that very rigid questions fired at them. And they're not expecting to have, like, be able to lead the conversation in some sort of way, right? And if you can master that, then you're ahead of others and you'll be able to be a lot more prepared in the way that, yes, you prepare beforehand, but you're also kind of setting the tone and understanding them during the call. Because no matter how prepared you are at the beginning, something could surprise you during. Something could just come up. Like, for example, in Jennifer's case, not anticipating the head of sales to be there. So I hope you see the difference. You're not hoping that you said the right thing. You're kind of collecting the data. You're kind of collecting data so you can make a lot more of a logical guess or be very sure that you're giving the answer that they want to hear, that they wanted to get out from you in the first place. So when you do this right, you look like a strategic team player, someone, again, who actually cares. And that is way ahead of everyone else. That's not what most people do. And that will set you apart. So if you're navigating the job hunt right now and you're struggling to secure that role, I have created a free quiz that you can take. It's just in the description below, and it will give you tips on like how to get that role that you're struggling to get, how to move forward. And so far it's been really helpful for a lot of people, and I hope it's really helpful for you. So that's in the description below. And remember, stop waiting for them to dictate the interview every time. Read the room, and sometimes we need to be able to lead a conversation to some extent. and have that discovery so we are more confident in our answers and really connect with them.